Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, one and all, whoever is watching. This is Dr. Jonathan Ellerby, and it is April 13th, the day after Easter for those who celebrate Easter, also in the midst of Passover for those who celebrate Passover, and I'm sure other celebrations around the world that I'm not as familiar with, but I wish you blessings for all that you celebrate. Now, today is kind of a special day on the 12 at 12 with Dr. J, because I'm going to do a follow-up to the Easter message. Now, this is not, just take a breath, this is not specifically a Christian message. I leave that to Christian communities, but this is more of a mystical and mythical understanding of the life and teachings of Christ in light of the evolution of human consciousness, and in particular, focusing on what we're going through right now. Indirectly, what you're going to find is that the 7 principles that we see embedded in his life are in fact the very things that I think that we as individuals, families, and communities truly could, or I would say need to, embrace today, not only to face what we're facing, but to create a brilliant new world with opportunity, greater harmony, and safety and support for all. The other thing I should let you know, if you're watching this, is that I am now, for this week, offering a special package. So yes, hang on, I'm going to give you a little commercial. Normally, to do a 90-day, 3-month program with me, it's about $300 to $500 a month. That's per month. And what I've put together is a package. So it's going to be 3 months of classes, live, interactive. That's 2 hours per class, 12 classes. And it's going to include an electronic copy of my new book, Spiritual Experience, Harnessing the Power of the 7 Super States of Consciousness. It's going to include a 30 audio session called Spiritual Resilience. It's going to include an 8 CD set download from Sounds True, a course I did with them called Your Spiritual Personality. Also, a 22-minute video on living a spiritually centered life, a 1-hour lecture on 7 things I should have told you about being human, and all of this will be for $450. So the 90-day, 3-month course is basically going to be 3 months for the price of 1 month, with the audiobook, the 30-session audio collection, the 8 CD audio download, the hour-long audio program, the 22-minute video, and the copy of my book, Spiritual Experience, all included. We're only doing this for a week, so that's why I'm doing this promotion on my precious time for the live 12 at 12. Okay, you got it. There's only a few of you watching right now, so I guess you get the deal. On that note, let's take a breath and let's get settled in. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, sit comfortably but alert. Feel yourself calming down, slowing down. Whatever's going on in the moment, you can bring yourself to stillness. And when we glimpse this place of stillness, may we remember that this is the place that unites us with our source, our origin, and the vast perspective on life that allows us to find love and wisdom in all things. When you're ready, coming back to the screen, it's interesting. I have had a difficult relationship to the life and teachings of Jesus in my life and career, only because many great masters and teachers like the Buddha or Hafiz or Kabir and so on, Rumi, they're easy to quote, to reference, to deconstruct, and not find a lot of social tension or a lot of built-in social conditioning and reaction. People are pretty neutral about the Buddha. Now, some people might be Buddhists, but usually they're pretty happy to hear another vision or exploration of the Buddha. And if you're following other Zen masters or Sufi masters or Kabbalistic masters or really mystical teachers of the past, then by definition, if you're into mysticism, you're usually into the oneness of consciousness and reality. So it's not really a big deal to hear a new person providing a new perspective on someone that you are intrigued by. Usually that's good. On the other hand, it's fascinating to me because Jesus, for me and for many scholars and many students, absolutely must be considered among the great mystics of the world. Mystic meaning one who has realized a direct experience of the ultimate nature of reality, a direct experience of God, spirit, consciousness, energy. But interestingly and ironically, because Jesus's mysticism was so radically complete and integral, he stands apart in many ways, but in many ways that have also caused him to be held by his followers in a way that's very different than the way other mystics and masters have been held. In other words, the heart of mysticism itself is inclusivity. But whenever we interpret the teaching of any teacher or master to be particular about a time, a space, or for that matter, to see the metaphors as literal, then the teaching and the tradition collapses into something exclusive rather than inclusive, just that simply. So what I invite you to consider for the next few minutes of our exploration is that maybe it is time to reconsider on a new level, a new depth, the life and teachings of Jesus, whether this is familiar to you or something you were once familiar with but set down and are now returning to, or maybe you just never really got into it. Now, there is a wonderful a book about a mystical interpretation of the life and teachings of Jesus. Of course, there are many, but I would recommend, I don't even know if I have it here, but it's by Stephen Mitchell. So just look up Stephen Mitchell and the word Christ or Jesus. I do think the work of Matthew Fox is great. I also think Richard Rohr has done some wonderful things with mystical Christianity. However, those two have really written more for people who identify as Christian. And now, for people who are more spiritual than religious, let's do a lightning run through on what I see as 7 of the core characteristics of the life and principles of Christ that are essential, effective, and practical for us in this moment and the world we're seeking to create. So if you watched my Easter message, you'll notice that I talked about Jesus's life and the symbols associated with it as foreshadowing the moment that we're in. In particular, the thorny crown and the cross, both symbols of suffering and our ability to transcend suffering. The idea that suffering can be a gateway to spiritual transcendence. So that's the first principle that we want to explore and embrace through his life. The second is to consider that the crown itself, a thorny crown, a corona, perhaps was in some magnificent metaphysical way referring to this actual time in history. And then the cross refers to the principles we're about to dive into, the integration of paradigms. In what many scholars call the axial period, we had a very vertical relationship with spirit and life. And so since around 500 BCE, everything became stratified. Spirituality became about enlightenment or salvation, but it was very me and the cosmic one. And I want to figure out how I can go straight up there. It was also a time of socially speaking, of materialism and political structure, political hierarchy. And then all this replaced the old world, which was communal, tribal, smaller groups, closer to nature, more tolerance and integration, sometimes celebration of the feminine. And I believe that Jesus in his life embodied those two paradigms coming together. And so 7 things that you can consider for yourself as we move through this extraordinary time. The first is to continuously return to the affirmation, only God is real. Only God is real. That means all things are energy, all things are consciousness, all things are one in the oneness of spirit, and that means you too. Your shortcomings, the things you're ashamed of, your greater moments, your lesser moments, everything about you is sacred. Principle number 1, only God is real. Therefore, everything about you is a part of God, and you must honor all that you are with that attitude. The second, ironically, despite the power and sanctity of who and what we are, we must practice letting go to an extreme. We must let go of all that we are. And this is really about the death of the ego. Interestingly, a Buddhist kind of concept. So the idea is let go of who you think you are, let go of what you think you are, and allow yourself to discover the essence that waits when you've given up all preferences and attachments. The third one that we see at work in the life of Christ is the rejection of materialism. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go and live, in the forest necessarily under a rock, but it does mean that we are releasing our prioritization and attachment to having stuff. And that when we have moments of doing without or having less, we celebrate them. Simplify is really the modern interpretation of the third principle. Simplify and release attachment to material comfort. The fourth one is to consider nature an extension of the self. Nature is our home. And if you look at the life and teachings of Jesus, it all happened outside, right? That's where his great awakening came. That's where he did his great teachings, the Sermon on the Mount. That's where we find all the most important scenes and stories from his life in nature. So let nature be an extension of your life. Let it be your family. Let it be your teacher. The next principle, the fifth, and believe it or not, in just this short time, we're going to get through them all. The fifth is the importance of small groups. So even though you may want to be a part of a mass movement or start a mass movement or support a mass movement, and certainly when it comes to things like politics and public teachers and figures and so on, I get that. But it means that if he kept a small group of disciples with him, if he taught to small groups of people, we must consider the power of intimacy in our personal life. Part of the gift of the quarantine is that many of us are overconnected. We see too many people in a day, and this principle is about simplifying your circle and staying connected with a smaller, more meaningful group. The sixth principle is to remember the importance of ceremony and ritual in your life. Symbolic action in time and space allows us to process psychologically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually what we're going through. So creating an altar that you visit every morning, creating moments of release, ceremonies of mourning and letting go, all these things are essential to our mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical transformation. And Jesus embraced those principles until his dying days, most notably in the Last Supper, where he created the communion ritual. Jesus was not afraid of magic and ceremony, and neither should you be. And finally, the essential role of the feminine. And I say this because in the life of Jesus, he embodies, or his story embodies, the power of the feminine in two really significant ways. The first is that he himself demonstrates incredible feminine traits throughout his life story. The way he teaches intimacy with the land, closeness to nature, small groups, the things we've listed, all very feminine qualities. He wasn't trying to start a movement, or for that matter, a church. He wasn't trying to win political power. He was simply staying in deep relationship, deep, intimate relationship with spirit, and then sharing it in very grassroots, intimate, personal ways with patience for time and process. So feminine qualities were embodied by his life, but feminine characters punctuated his story. And not only do we have the obvious Mary Magdalene, but we have Mary, his mother, who of course became the deified and sanctified Virgin Mary. So from the time of his birth until the time of his death, and even the discovery of the empty tomb, we find that the most significant characters that see him for who he is, that feel him for who he is, that literally give birth to the consciousness that he is, they're all feminine. They're all women, actually. I mean, they're not just feminine, they're women. They're in women's bodies, and they're there at the base of the cross, and they're there in the empty tomb. And so the question as we come to a close on this 12 at 12 is, how can you embrace these 7 principles in your life, and how might you foster them as you go out into the world after this time of quarantine? How can we create a new world through these principles that were shared with us 2,000 years ago, and find their relevance, their meaning, and their purpose today? So that's a lot to think about. Maybe we can explore it a little more tomorrow. I thank you for your time. I'm glad you're listening. I hope you pay attention to that limited offer we have, the 90-day class with the book, the audio course, the audio collection, the video class, the hour-long lecture, all of that for $450. We're just going to be offering it for about a week, so let me know if you're interested. Love you all, and I will see you soon.